From AgriPoint, I'm James Kotecki, and this is the Point Cloud. My guest today is Nigel Hughes, a food innovation advisor and former SVP Innovation and Research at Kellogg. Nigel Hughes, welcome to the Point Cloud. Thanks for joining us.
Absolute pleasure, James. Good to be here.
Okay, so I want to start with your LinkedIn bio, which is one of the more poetic LinkedIn bios that I have ever seen. And it starts off with this line where you say that you think of food as a, quote, celebration, a language, and even a personal ethos. I love that. What do you mean by that?
Thank you so much, James, for the compliment. I don't know if it's poetic, but it's very meaningful to me. If you think about food, you think about your favorite food. You'll probably think about something that you ate when you were growing up, probably made by your mother or your grandmother, perhaps, or some close relative. And that's what food is. We can talk about products. We can talk about ultra processed foods, which we might talk about later. We can talk about all kinds of things, different brands. But ultimately, food is a cultural connection. Every single celebration, every single memorialization that we have in our lives is associated with certain food. That can be the big celebrations of the year, Christmas time, Thanksgiving. It can be birthdays. And so that's really what I mean by that. And that's what I want to be the starting point when we come to talk about food. There's much more to be discussed after that, but that's the starting point.
Do you feel like most people either don't have that starting point or forget to have that starting point in the industry that you came from or just in this space generally?
I think generally we've moved towards a little bit of a food as fuel culture. We get food as we go, we graze food, and we perhaps don't interact with it, perhaps because we don't make a lot of it ourselves these days in the way that we perhaps did a few years ago. I think it would be overstating, though, that people still don't see food as central. They do. You only got to scratch the surface a tiny bit and you're immediately there. So even if it's perhaps not what it was a few years ago, which makes me sound like a doddery old something or other, the fact is it is still innately there within us.
So I love that philosophy. And then tell me about now what specifically you did at Kellogg so people can have a fuller context of where you're coming from in this conversation. What was your role there when it came to innovation in this space?
Well, I have a sort of serious answer to that and a slightly more tongue-in-cheek answer to it. I'll give you the tongue-in-cheek answer first, because I do think ultimately that's what I was trying to do. Whether I achieved that or not is a different question. Many, many years ago, I was getting a haircut and someone asked me what I did. And I described what I did in the usual sort of slightly complex terms. And the guy turned to me and said, "Oh, so you're the Willy Wonka of Kellogg." And that's what I was. That's what I was ultimately. I was about, and I was working with a hugely talented team. That team was about creating the future of food, about designing foods, redesigning foods to make them more appealing, to make them more nutritionally fulfilling, to make them more sustainable. So that's what I was doing. That was the heart of what I was doing. But in the end, again, I come back to that celebration. When we think of Willy Wonka, we think of something that's wonderful and inspiring and fun and engaging. And all too often, I think we get into conversations about, but are foods designed? Are they? Yes, they are. They are. They have been from the Stone Age. This is nothing new. We're just doing it in a slightly different way on a slightly different scale. That's all I would say.
So let me know whenever the metaphor breaks down. But if you were Willy Wonka, tell me about the factory. In other words, the physical environments that you were, are we talking about you in some kind of secret underground layer with like weird chemical stuff bubbling up? And then there's like a little piece of gum that simulates an entire meal. What is the actual work involved and what does it look like to people who might be there?
That's great, James. Yeah, there wasn't a river of chocolate running through the laboratory or something like that. But what the work actually involved was work that went right across the whole spectrum. So we started in a kitchen. We started with a culinary team that were playing with the foods to a great extent, experimenting with them, but playing with them and finding new opportunities. And then obviously through engagement with our consumers, then taking those ideas and seeing how we could make them practical. Now, Kellogg's a commercial enterprise. Companies are commercial enterprises. You've got to be able to do things profitably. You've got to be able to do things that are in tune with broader issues across our society, like the sustainability issues. Are we using the same ingredients that we used 20, 30, 40 years ago? Are there better or different ingredients from different sources? How do we incorporate those? And then ultimately, right through to, in a company like Kellogg, making millions and millions, if not billions and billions of items of this food for sale every day. And that's something also I think that it's difficult to get your head around. When you can talk about millions and billions, but it's very difficult to get your head around the scale of some of this stuff. It's big scale, and you've got to be able to do it reproducibly. There's no point doing a one-off.
It is something like a miracle, right? That like my box of cornflakes tastes just like the box of cornflakes that's sold across the country and that was sold maybe 20 years ago. Maybe you've changed the ingredients slightly, but that I, the person experiencing it, think of it as the same thing. When obviously it can't be exactly the same thing, but somehow you have Willy Wonka-ishly created that illusion.
I'm gonna live to regret the Willy Wonka, aren't I? But that's fine. That's fine. We'll keep going with it, James. But seriously, you touch on a great point. How you can do that reproducibly, which has been something that the consumer industry has perfected over many, many years. But now increasingly, how you can do that when you are changing the raw ingredients and the processes. It takes real effort and real insight and real skill and real knowledge.
Tell me about how that extends to how the food is grown and harvested. Obviously, Kellogg is creating products with food ingredients and then delivering them to consumers. But then to what extent does that purview and did your purview looking at innovation extend back towards how it was actually grown?
Well, it's fundamental. It's absolutely fundamental. You know, most of the companies that we're familiar with, the big branded food companies, actually started off very close to their source ingredients. There's a reason that Battle Creek, Michigan is where W.K. Kellogg came up with the idea of cornflakes, because what happened, I don't know for sure what day it happened and exactly how it happened, but I'm sure at one point he looked out the window and what did he see? He saw fields of corn and wheat and oats. And therefore that was a natural raw material. I work for Danone. Danone's about, the dairy business is about milk as a raw ingredient. And so very much these foods are founded in that, but it's not as if agricultural technology, and it's not as if methods and approaches and the very ingredients themselves, the seed choices haven't changed over many years. And so there's a tremendous amount of work goes into ensuring the quality of those ingredient streams, ensuring an understanding of what the economics are going to be like over time. You know, we can talk about climate change in very sort of heady terms, but very practically, what are your yields going to be? How are things going to be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years time? And then using those things as a base for further innovation. So how can you produce other foods and variants on foods through those ingredient bases?
So we've established your innovation bona fides in this space. And now I'm curious about the trends that you look at on a macro level that are shaping the space. You mentioned climate change, obviously. Perhaps that's the trend, but I want to just give you the space to say the trends that you look at in the lens that you look at them through.
Yeah, I would focus on two massive trends in the food space right now. I'll talk about the whole issue around the food system and sustainability in a moment, but the first one is what's happening with GLP-1 and Ozempic and the like, and all these other branded drugs, which are fundamentally changing the way that people interact with their food. For the first time, there are medical interventions which directly impact not only your food choices, your food quantity consumption. So these are massive, massive changes. Now, I don't want to exaggerate that though, because it's very early days. And we, as human beings, we love to exaggerate things that are just happening right now with that tremendous recency bias we've got, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think for sure there are major things happening there. And the food industry at large, and I don't just mean the big manufactured goods folks, but I mean the food industry even more broadly, has to come to terms with what that means and how it's going to impact the behavior of all of those billions of consumers in the end. So that's the first point.
Yeah.
The second one is, if you look at any measure on sustainability, any measure around the climate crisis, the fact is that the food system is squarely in the middle of all of that, both for good and for bad. You know, in theory, we should be capable of building food systems which are climate positive, looking at soil health, looking at the kinds of ingredients that we use that we were just talking about, and the way in which we design our foods. However, right now we're far, far away from that. And it's all aspects. It's not only the negative impact of our current farming methods, it's also food wastage. Enormous amounts of food is simply thrown away, particularly many of the foods that people are driving towards get thrown away. 40% of those foods are never, ever consumed. And so looking at that food system from all dimensions is really, really the key challenge. And it's extremely exciting. It's extremely exciting for an innovator because you've got to do something. We can't keep doing what we've been doing.
It's interesting that you talk about both of those trends together. I don't have as much to say on the GLP-1 issue, but I am curious if there are hints of thoughts about how those two trends might interact. So in other words, if we're wasting a lot of food on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's a drug out there that makes people maybe not want to eat as much food, that's a vast oversimplification, but like those two things are potentially not separate issues, right? There may be an overlap in those trends as well.
Yeah, and we're also coming to a point where we will almost certainly reach a maximal human population in the next 30 to 40 years. Now, I'm not talking about tomorrow morning, but we will see other fundamental changes, and those things will interact. The way I like to speak about it, this is an oversimplification, but I think it's helpful. We created a food system during the 20th century, which was about getting as many calories out of the food system as we could so that no one would be undernourished. Now we need to transform that food system to a food system where we give maximal nutritional benefit for minimal calorific intake, or at least minimal or optimized calorific intake. Now, that's a massive oversimplification. I could go into subgroups in one country, or I could go into other countries, and you'd say, well, yes, but they're at this place, they're at this place, they're at this place. But the fact is, that's broadly speaking what we need to do. If at the same time as doing that, we can also work on the agricultural systems, and I hate glib words like regenerative, but agricultural systems that are more innately sustainable, then I think we've got an incredibly exciting and positive prospect, rather than some of the doomsayers who will tell you we're in a catastrophic position and we can never get ourselves out of it.
It's interesting that you say that you hate glib words. This is a passion of mine, is the words that people use to define things, and then how those words change over time in terms of how they're perceived and sometimes become politicized. And maybe that the word that becomes politicized was originally a word that was a response to another word that had become politicized or toxic. And so now we have to keep changing our vocabulary. Is that do you feel like that's an ongoing struggle for you as you're trying to, you and your colleagues, try to define these terms and just get people to think in these ways of like breaking them out of partisan terminology, so to speak?
I love that. Yeah, yes, it is. And it has been throughout my whole career. I was doing this stuff for 35 years, and it was throughout my whole career, because mostly I would enter the patient through the scientific perspective. And in that world, you deal with words with a great deal of precision, very specific about what something means. And there is, I'll go back to that word I used, regenerative. There is, well, unfortunately, there's not even one, but there are a few pretty precise ways of defining that. Unfortunately, then those words become touch points for wonderful marketing campaigns, dare I say, for political stances. And then suddenly all of this can run away with itself. And what you'll get is, again, it's another word that now is common in our parlance. You get greenwashing, you get appropriation of these things for pretty, sometimes quite nefarious ends.
So we've been talking at a very high level about trends, and now I want to talk about, on an innovation level, some of the specific technologies that you're having your eye on and that you're excited about that might be able to have some of the positive impacts that you're talking about. So from a technology perspective, what do you like? What are you seeing, and why should people be excited?
Well, I love technologies that democratize, because if you can make small differences to large groups of people, or you can generate large data sets, you normally can find new insights and new things. And so if I talk about on the agricultural side, I love technologies that allow us to bring data collection right down to the farm and into the farmer's hands. Those forms of data collection allow us far greater accuracy because we're dealing with a much bigger data set that's real. It's not some lab data set, even if on occasion they may have a little less precision. And I think that's really, really exciting. We've democratized speaking to each other through social media, right? That transformed the way in which we did that. Again, I think that's perhaps an interesting metaphor because there are some good aspects to that and some not so savory aspects to it. But when I look to other areas, we've got huge opportunities to make that step. If we can do that through simple technologies, but applied by many in real situations, then I think we're going to get massively new learnings.
Do you see ways that this has been done well and ways that this hasn't been done well? I mean, right on the edges of your answer there, for example, is the notion that not everybody is interested in the democratization piece as much as they may be over-indexed on the precision piece.
Yeah. And I do see instances where it's been done well, but doing it well requires, as human beings, I'll get a little philosophical for a moment, James, if you don't mind, but as human beings, we love the notion of precision. We love to think that something is absolute. Yeah. And we love to think that we're on the right side of that absolute. Yeah. Of course, that's the way we operate as humans. The simple fact is, so often that's mistaken. And what then tends to happen is you get absolute concentration around a completely inaccurate, but an extraordinarily precise answer. And that's extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. Rather than that, if you take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to forgo some of that precision, but I'm going to allow myself to understand this problem or this opportunity as a system, as a more complex set of interactions, and then I'm going to find the best solution for that system, then in all likelihood, I'll come up with something that's very different to the solution of the precise solution. But more important than that, isn't wholly wrong. It may simply be a relatively rough sketch. You know, you're talking about the Picasso dove here, not some painting that's done with incredible precision, but it captures the reality so much more. So now let me go concrete, and excuse me for you're getting me on my little soapbox here because I feel very passionately about this. So where I see people being successful, it's where they are really happy to accept the complexity of the system. They're not trying to be reductionist and say, no, we've got to discard all of that because it's noise. No, the noise is the thing. So it really makes me happy. And I'll go back to the agricultural example because it's a system which is both figuratively and in reality messy. Yeah, it's complex. There are many people growing many things in many conditions on many farms. But if we're going to make progress with that, we've got to allow them to be part of the solution, allow them to be leading what we should be measuring and how we should be measuring it, rather than narrow band saying, okay, let's set this up in a laboratory, let's measure these few things very tightly, and then actually coming up with solutions that got nothing at all to do with the reality of things.
And at the corporate level, does this require folks like you to be continually preaching this message of this kind of necessary mindset shift? And are there certain folks who are more able to get it than others?
Yes, yes, and yes, James. So first of all, yes, it does. Because again, if you go to what we do and what we love to do and what we have done over many years organizationally in corporations, we love to compartmentalize, right? I'm in charge of this bit. I'm in charge of this.
Yeah.
Innovation is the one space where you can't compartmentalize. It's absolutely a waste of time to try and do that. So that's very real. But again, high level, but we're political animals. And the simple fact is that elements of compartmentalization work for some people, perhaps don't work for others as much. So helping people understand the advantages to all of that kind of systems approach is fundamental.
Yeah. If I had to imagine the kind of person who could embrace that kind of, it may not be perfect, but it's actually a great sketch of what's going on versus we need super precise measures. If I could imagine the kind of person who could embrace the kind of mentality that you're talking about, it would be some kind of small startup innovator. And a place like Kellogg, I would imagine, would be a more challenging place for that, where maybe old school mindsets are, harder to shake. Am I right about that? Is that true? Is it harder to innovate at a place like Kellogg, which has a storied brand and has been doing things, very successfully for many years?
I don't think it's harder or easier in one place versus the other. I think it's different. If I take your example of the startup innovator, their problem is that their system is defined by their excitement about a particular solution. Generally speaking, startups start because you've got an opportunity that I love and I'm passionate about. And so helping people understand that even if that idea is a great idea, one of the things I used to preach against, excuse the word preach, but I used to preach against is this word idea. I think it's a nasty little word, idea, because ideas tend to reside in single human heads. They are not collectives. They're not things that bring us together. Opportunities bring us together. Ideas don't. They divide us. But anyway, the startup entrepreneur will tend to want to sell that idea, perhaps rather than understanding how that opportunity can fit best in the overall system as a solution. Mm-hmm. Having said that, for sure, the different challenge that you face in established companies is companies are built for efficiency. They're not built for innovation. Companies do certain things very well. And, the kind of companies I worked in, they manifest that thing they did well through brands. And those brands, they tend to want to drive those brands as efficiently as they possibly can. And that can be a challenge when it comes to innovation and change. The other issue with bigger companies is the scale issue. Going back to what I was saying, if you do make a change, the scale of that change is so vast, you've got to find ways of experimenting your way into change. And that's not straightforward.
I love the idea that both those entities, the large and the small, have natural blind spots that need to be called out. Otherwise, people will become, they're blind to them, but they also can be a little haughty about the other folks having those blind spots, but not realizing that they have them themselves. How many years did you just say? You said 30 plus years doing this?
Yeah, across my whole career, okay. Unilever, Danone, C. Johnson, and Kellogg, 35 years, yeah.
And you have a science background, is that right?
Yes, a long time ago. I'm a PhD chemist by training, PhD background, but constantly worked at the sort of commercial innovation interface. That was where I had my fun.
When you go and give advice to young people today, starting out in the food industry, people that want to innovate and shake things up, how do you distill the lessons of your career into some advice for them?
Well, look at what you're doing through a system lens. Look at it. Look at the interfaces. The interfaces are always the most challenging thing. You can be great at what you do. You can work with other people who are great at what you do, at what they do, should I say. But if you can't work the interfaces, then you're going to have real problems. And so really learn how to manage those things. That's my core piece of advice.
And by interface, are you talking about the way that your entity, whether that's you as an individual or your group, just connects and interfaces with a different group of people?
Both inside the organization, how you as an individual interface with other people across your organization who may have other skill sets, but also how, as an organization, you can drive to being sufficiently open that you can use the best thoughts and insights from people beyond the organization. That old adage, yeah, there are inevitably more brighter people outside your organization than inside. It's a simple truth.
Does this relate to the idea of diversity to you, the notion that we need to get a lot of different minds inside the company because we need to have as many different perspectives as we face the broader world as possible?
This is the first conversation we've had, James, and it's so funny that you just go straight along that path, because that's exactly what it means. That's what diversity means to me. Diversity, and now I know, again, it's another word or a set of words that have been hijacked by different groups of people. But diversity to me is at the very bedrock of innovation. Evolution, which is the ultimate innovation process, is fundamentally based on diversity. People learn about Darwinian evolution and survival of the fittest. And unfortunately, I don't know whether it's the way they're being taught or the way they listen, but so many people assume that's to do with scale and power and ability to beat someone. This is beating people. And it's got nothing to do with that. It's all about the capacity to be innovative and respond to changes in the environment. That's what market innovation is, just an evolutionary process. And you will be most successful in that if you are diverse.
So then, do you think in terms of winning and losing, or do you think in terms of evolving and changing and cooperation? Because you're saying it's not about beating someone, but a lot of people might think of evolution in terms of, win versus loss kind of scenarios.
Absolutely not. I completely believe that it is about cooperation and finding expansive niches. If you play the future, this is not about winning in the present. This is about finding the big spaces for the future. Look at massively successful companies. What do? They're not there battling over some past that vanished 20, 30, 40 years ago. They're creating futures. There's always much more opportunity there because you're shaping it too. So you get to actually decide. One of the things I used to say to folks is, I love my job because I can never be wrong. I'm making up the future. Who's going to tell me I'm wrong? Nobody can tell me I'm wrong because I'm making it up. And there's an enormous power in that. And if you do get embattled, if you do get into this notion that this is me versus them, I guarantee some third party will come and eat both of you. That's exactly what will happen.
So then what's the wide open space? Is there a wide open space you think more people should have their eye on then? If there's another wide open space out there, always is another one out there.
I go back to what I was saying in the food space. It's the positive outlook of a nutritionally dense, I'm going to use some of the cliched words, a nutritionally dense, regenerative food system that actually moves us away from the need for a healthcare system which we can't afford into a space where we maintain well-being for much longer periods in our life. There will be a point in everyone's life where you need some form of medical intervention to keep you going. However, what about that being 6 weeks or 6 months rather than being 6 years or even 20 years as it is for some people right now? That future is absolutely feasible if we work in the right way together.
My understanding is that now you also have a tour guide company in Washington, D.C., where you live. Does that relate to any of the stuff we have talked about in this conversation? Your thoughts on innovation, your thoughts on the food system? Is there any connection there?
There is an enormous connection. In fact, two connections, I would say, James. You probably gathered from the answers I gave about innovation that at heart, I'm a storyteller. I believe that innovators are storytellers. And obviously, the tour guiding is a different form, but it's a form of storytelling. So that's the more practical link. But the real link is that I was fascinated by the history of Washington, D.C., because it really represents the history of the United States, and it represents, therefore, the history of certainly Western civilization for the last couple of hundred years, 250 years. I was really fascinated because it had been sold to me so much as a very linear progression, and sold to me so much through the great white man theory of progress. And I didn't find that credible. And as I've done my work as a tour guide, and as I've been reading, and as I've got more and more into this, I see that it is just another example of a complex system with many interactions, many people, groups of people involved who we never hear about, but actually had just as much of a role in terms of determining history and determining the future as some of the more familiar names and familiar faces. And I love that. And that's an infinite project. I can just keep learning, keep reading, and keep discovering, and then sharing it with others, which I love to do.
I love that. Well, Nigel Hughes, thank you for telling your story today with us on The Point Cloud. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, James. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, that's our show. Please subscribe to the show, rate us 5 stars, and follow us on social media where the conversation continues. From AgriPoints, I'm James Kotecki, and this is The Point Cloud.